The following 2-minute pitch is about physician interference. Our position is based on the case where an elder woman with multiple sclerosis is hospitalized, and the doctors believe that she will need to be placed on a feeding tube in order to receive better nourishment. She has asked about it and agrees with the physicians. Later, before the tube is even placed, she becomes very unsettled and confused about her decision to have the feeding tube placed, and she no longer wants it. The next morning, when she is lucid, she agrees once again and has no memory of her state of mind from the evening before. If the patient does not get placed on a feeding tube, she won't be receiving the best nourishment, and in fact her condition could worsen. This is how we came up with our argument, but it looks like a lot, so let's break it down. First, we argue that because of her altering decisions, the patient may not be fully autonomous in her decision-making of her medical treatment. We argue this because at first, the patient was lucid when she entered the hospital. She gave the doctors her consent for placing her on a feeding tube, but later in the evening, she became disoriented and confused about her decision, and she no longer wanted to be placed on the feeding tube. We also argue that the patient is not competent, therefore informed consent is not met. We argue this because of her altering decisions and how she may not be fully autonomous, like we had stated before. Also, if she is not fully autonomous, she is not fully competent. Our next argument is that the team of physicians does not undermine the patient's autonomy by placing her on the feeding tube. This is because, since she is not competent, she cannot give informed consent. Also, a physician can interfere when a patient is not fully autonomous according to the principle of autonomy, as long as it is what the patient would do in his or her rational state. Also, if the woman was fully rational, she would not put her own life at risk. Our last argument states that both respect for autonomy and the duty of beneficence require the physicians to place the patient on a feeding tube for her own good. This is because the team of physicians does not undermine the patient's autonomy by placing her on a feeding tube. Also, physicians have an obligation to their patients of non-maleficence and beneficence. Not placing this woman on a feeding tube does not meet with the physician's obligation of beneficence and non-maleficence. In conclusion, the physicians are required to put the patient on a feeding tube according to respect for autonomy and the duty of beneficence because of these points that we stated earlier.